Today I'd like to talk about God's love in consideration. So firstly, our sense of love is felt as happiness, peace and joy. And that flows from people we value, objects we value and events we value when they're in the right context. We feel grief as a feeling of sadness, anxiety or anger when our expectation of love is not met. What strongly determines whether we flow in love or grief is the level of consideration that we apply to the context that surrounds us, especially in relation to the present and the past and the fast approaching future. There are two opposite extremes of consideration. At one end, there is no consideration, and the people who are at this end are often labelled inconsiderate. They are often also perceived as being rude, but the fact is, they just don't consider their actions or their surroundings, including you. As you move up in the line towards full consideration, you get to the halfway point. Here's where we find the manipulators. Manipulators only consider you in regards to what they can get from you. They only consider the environment in relation to what they can get from the environment. And they only consider events that they will benefit from, without any consideration of the collateral damage they may cause to either you or their surroundings. Everyone else is somewhere between the manipulators and ultimately God's love. The vast majority of people are in the first group, which is the inconsiderate. The reason being is because the brain can't take in everything, so it has to narrow the focus, and then it guesses about what's out on the blur. Inconsiderate people don't care what's in the blur until it's no longer in the blur. Their philosophy is ignorance is bliss until it's too late to miss. So what the brain does is it makes up stories to explain life without taking the time to research the facts. They often feel threatened when they're challenged, preferring to try and defend what they think they know instead of learning what they don't know. They're not rude or stupid, they're just inconsiderate. The manipulators are the smallest of the groups. Now, I'm not talking about the average person who might try and get an advantage, but about people who appear to be considerate of those around them, but after you come into contact with them and they leave, you feel that somehow you've been ripped off, that you now owe them a debt that one day they'll be back around to collect. Beware of this group, because many of them become religious pastors. God's love is not a hierarchy, but actually it looks more like an upside down pyramid with the singularity of God's love at the bottom, supporting everything above. You see, God the Father is the ultimate when it comes to consideration. Even down to the bacteria that's on our skin and the bacteria that's on that bacteria. And that bacteria stops harmful bacteria from infecting us. We will probably never fully understand the depth of God's consideration. And that's because it's a story for eternity. Consideration is a growing into knowledge that leads to wisdom, and wisdom is the next step. God's consideration is based on the best outcome of happiness, peace, and joy, love, for his family. And as we tap into God's consideration, we all flow in God's love. The inconsiderate get whatever comes their way. The manipulators get whatever they can personally control at the expense of others. And those in Christ, they get God's amazing, ever expanding, ever considering, eternal love.